profile, very highly regarded. Testing 1 2 3. Testing. Testing 1 2 3. Just you can't hear anything here right now. Okay, sweet. So what? Okay, right. Okay. Okay, bye.
One, two, testing, testing. Gracias a Dios. Yeah. Hi Nina, Tom here. Hey, can you hear? Can you hear through the mic? Do you know? Okay. Hey, just want to check. When I'm tapping the mic now, can you hear that? Yep. Okay, good. I just wanted to confirm it was actually coming through it. Sorry. All right. I'll just pop the phone on the podium. Do you have this mic? Is it how much question? Okay. No worries, I'll just pop you on the thing.
Hi everyone.
There you go. I might try and pull this cable forward. Good.
Hello everyone, good afternoon, sorry for lateness. I chose not to speed. First off, I can give you an update. We have flight cancellations appear to be dropping. The cancellations have dropped to 14 today, a significant drop from the 36 cancelled yesterday, and I expect that they will continue to reduce. 14 flights were cancelled at Auckland Airport today, that's 8 international and 6 domestic, and that's down from 35 flights yesterday and 28 on Tuesday. There are some ongoing disruptions with 19 flights either delayed or rescheduled. The Endeavour has sailed for Marsden Point Oil Refinery this morning, so that's the Royal New Zealand Navy tanker, HMNZS Endeavour. It's gone at 11 o'clock and is expected to arrive at the refinery this evening. It will be loaded up with 4.8 million litres of diesel fuel for delivery to ports in New Zealand. This is the equivalent of 150 road tankers and will free up road tankers to move aviation fuel. There are a total of 20 Category 5 NZDF or New Zealand Defence Force tanker drivers assisting industry with fuel movement. 12 of the drivers are with BP and 8 are with Z Energy. NZDF has moved 2 fuel filters overnight to Whenuapai Air Base to assist resupply if necessary. In terms of outages in Auckland for retail fuel, they remain minimal. The fuel companies have significantly increased the number of trucks bringing fuel into the region, and stocks are being maintained. 34 additional tanker trucks were deployed to meet on ground demand. 20 New Zealand Defence Force drivers are supporting the industry. Industry has advised that there may be some short-term outages of specific fuel grades at individual stations, but these are being restocked as quickly as possible. I think we can probably now hear from you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Peter Mercy, I'm the Secretary for Transport, and I've been convening the working group around the supply issues. As the Minister's already referred to the Endeavour and the NZDF drivers that have been supporting the fuel issue. One of the advantages of having the working group is the ability to solve issues very quickly. So this morning, one of the issues that arose was with the possibility of being able to transfer fuel by truck down to the airport. They sought the assistance of some fuel operators, and so the Air Force has been able to provide 6 fuel operators who will be on site to help with that. I think importantly, the group as a collective of people who are various stakeholders in this process, the information that has been shared has meant that there's now a greater degree of confidence, both knowing where we are, how things are likely to play out over the next few days, and just as importantly, what the transition will be once the pipe is fixed. I'm not going to go into any more detail on that. We've got a number of speakers here who will now be able to fill in each of those parts of the puzzle, and just as with yesterday, we'll come back and take questions at the end. So I'd like to start with an update on the pipeline issue from Sjoerd Post, who's the Chief Executive of Refining New Zealand. So Sjoerd, the floor is yours.
Great. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, and thank you very much for joining us.
Perfect. Yeah, and apologies I couldn't be there yesterday, but I was entertaining colleagues of yourselves at the site, as you will have picked up. We made good progress overnight, so we remain on track to hit the window that we originally promised between Sunday noon and Tuesday noon. As we speak, the offending piece of pipe has been removed, and we are sort of taking 2 other small sections out and hope to actually be able to be welding the new piece of pipe back in today. And I understand as well that yesterday there were quite a few questions about, okay, where to from, say, Sunday or Monday, and let me spend a few minutes on that. In order to get full certification back from Lloyd's to operate at 100% capacity, a few things need to happen. So when the pipeline is back up and running, it will run at 80% of its capacity, and we will need to perform a number of tests. So I think we're all getting very clued up on pipeline technology. We need to do 2 specific pig runs, one to test for metal stress. That was already planned anyway, but we need to do one for wall thickness. The problem with that particular pig is it's in Brazil at the moment, so we're trying to expedite it back to New Zealand in order to do that pig run, but it will happen sometime in the middle of October, we expect. It clearly generates an enormous stream of data because it travels over 170 kilometers worth of pipeline, and that data needs to be analyzed by both ourselves and Lloyd's, and that'll take some 4 to 6 weeks. So realistically, we will be running at 80% capacity, I guess, for the remainder of this year before we can return to full operating pressure of 87 bar. We'll be starting at 70 bar. The difference in volume throughput is, in the case of full pipeline capacity, we put about 400,000 liters per hour through. In the restricted case, it's about 320,000 liters. I'll leave it there. Happy, of course, to take questions, but I'll let you moderate.
Thank you, Sjoerd. So at this point, I'd like to invite Andrew McNaught, Mobile Country Manager, to talk on behalf of the fuel providers.
Thanks, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name's Andrew McNaught. I'm the fuel industry spokesperson, speaking on behalf of the customers of Refining NZ. And again, I'd like to reassure you that ground fuel supply into Auckland continues to be healthy. As was said previously, there may be some short periods where certain fuel grades may be unavailable at some local service stations, but we anticipate that we'll be able to manage the demand for ground fuels if consumers maintain their regular buying patterns. We're extremely focused on managing this issue to minimise inconvenience to customers until the pipeline is repaired and we can return to normal fuel delivery operations, and we apologise for any inconvenience or this may any inconvenience to our customers. In the last few days, the fuel industry has significantly increased its road transport of fuels into Auckland, and we remind you that the refinery continues to produce fuel, and dedicated coastal shipping vessels are continuing to load at the refinery for distribution around the country's ports. And to support the delivery of ground fuels to service stations, some companies are filling trucks to higher than usual weight limits in order to maximise the efficiency of their trucking operations, and in addition, some service station deliveries are now occurring outside of typically permitted time windows. all with safety in front of mind. The fuel industry continues to work closely together alongside the government and other stakeholders to minimise the impacts of the temporary outage of the refinery to Auckland pipeline. From an aviation perspective, the JUHI at Auckland Airport met today, or the operating committee of the JUHI, to review the fuel allocation on airlines, and it's been decided that to maintain that 30% allocation until Thursday 28th of September, but this will continue to be reviewed on a daily basis. In terms of the truck loading facility at Marsden Point Terminal, some very positive news there. So we had a successful dry test yesterday, which was where a number of companies tested procedures, processes from a safety and PQ perspective, and we are hoping to load our first truck this afternoon with a view to that getting to the airport this evening. After the necessary product quality checks have been undertaken, we'll be discharging our first truck into the JUHI facility. And then we then anticipate about 6 to 8 dedicated jet trucks that will be running up and down from Whangarei into the airport on a daily basis. So that's something that's good news. Another piece of good news is to do with Wynyard Wharf, and so you'll recall from yesterday that we were looking at bunkering a vessel there with jet fuel, and then looking to bridge jet from the Wynyard Wharf into the airport. So we've had some good results there, with a view that the Matuku is at the refinery at the moment. It'll be loading some jet, around about 1.5 million litres. That will be sailing tomorrow with a view to getting into the Wynyard Wharf on Saturday, with a view to, assuming that all the controls checks are in place, to be able to access that early to middle of next week. So again, 1.5 million litres to supplement the roading, or the trucks that are coming down from the Whangarei terminal. Just wanted to spend a minute just on time pressures, because everyone wants this fixed tomorrow, but the reality is, again, I just want to emphasise the fact that we need to make sure that we're doing everything appropriately from a health, safety, environment and product quality perspective. So that will always be front of mind. We want to get this situation resolved as soon as possible, but safety must always be our key priority. And again, while we can't control what has happened on the pipeline, we're very grateful with the support of government, and we appreciate the way that our airline customers and Auckland International Airport are managing this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd now ask Justin Taihumbers from Barnes, the Board of Airline, to come and update us.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon. I'm Justin Taihumbers, the Executive Director of Barnes, the Board of Airline Representatives, and I'm speaking on behalf of our 28 airline members today. Firstly, the airlines have continued to stabilise their networks to run off the 30% allocation of fuel available at Auckland, and have in fact been managing to marginally exceed this target over the last 3 days. Airlines have been successful in adjusting their schedules to this fuel level, and now with minimal cancellations and disruptions. So right now, airlines are operating over 95% of their usual flights from Auckland. It's a fairly extraordinary feat, given they're operating off 30% of their usual available fuel out of the country's largest airport. So passengers can start to feel more comfortable for their travel plans over the next few days. There are very few planned cancellations, and disruptions to schedules are being minimised. We thank passengers for their continued patience and understanding through this period as the pipe is fixed. However, we do ask that they continue to be prudent if they are expecting to travel in the next few days, to continue looking online to monitor their flight status, and also to speak with the airlines and their travel agents if they're expecting any changes to their travel plans, or to check in and see if there are. On the domestic network is stabilised and is largely operating as normal. There are no planned cancellations from Air New Zealand, and over the next 3 days, so Friday, Saturday and Sunday, Jetstar has no planned cancellations. With regard to the international network, this too has largely stabilised. we've continued to see a reduction of cancellations on international flights on a day-by-day basis. So today we're expecting only 5 international flights to be cancelled over the total network. Now, with regard to the school holidays, starting at the end of next week, understandably there's concern from people around their travel plans over this period. So the planning expectation for airlines is that the pipeline will be fixed by 28th of September, and on that date we would expect to see the fuel allocations gradually increase. On that basis, airlines are expecting that they will be able to meet their school holiday schedules with minimal disruption. So in terms of what would happen with a fix on next Thursday, as I said, we'd expect to see a gradual uplift in fuel allocations and up to the 80% you've just heard. Given that right now the airlines are operating at 95% of their flights, we would expect to see even more stability following next Thursday, and even more passengers being able to get to their destinations. So essentially what's happening there is the pressure starts to ease off on the fuel supply for airlines, which will just improve the disruption situation even further. Stabilising the airline networks on this fuel allocation has been the result of an extraordinary effort behind the scenes from airlines in managing their fuel logistics. They've applied a number of innovative methods in fuel management to achieve this. This is including daily refuelling stops in Australia and Pacific that we've spoken about, and they're continuing on long-haul flights. These can result in the flights taking a little longer in their usual schedule. So again, for passengers travelling on those, we just advise to check with their travel agents about connecting flights. Look, reaching this point has been the result of a major work across the industry. There's a huge amount of people working incredibly hard to keep passengers getting to their destinations. On behalf of the airlines, I'd like to thank all of the members of the working group, all of these people working hard behind the scenes, and in particular Auckland Airport, Airways, the Minister and Government for their ongoing support. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Now I'd like to ask Adrian Littlewood, who's the Chief Executive of Auckland Airport, to give you an update on what's been happening as a result here.
Thank you, Peter. Kia ora tātou, everyone. Adrian Littlewood, Chief Executive of Auckland Airport. Look, again, I've been into the terminals today to just speak with ground crew and just inspect the activity on the ground, and again I can assure you that passengers are dealing with this matter with great grace, as well as staff who are handling this incredibly well. As the Minister mentioned earlier, about today, only about 3% of our total flights have been cancelled, with, as I'm assured, almost all those passengers rehoused onto other flights. That peaked yesterday at about 7% of our schedule, so seeing that decline and that stabilisation, as mentioned before, is very pleasing to see. Our attention, obviously, while on passengers and supporting airlines continues, our focus at the moment is also on supporting the fuel companies in receiving fuel into Auckland Airport at the Juhai facility here. So we're working with Auckland Transport and Auckland Council on dealing with that matter and making sure that process is smooth and safe. We also have been supporting the airlines in terms of some of their innovative refuelling techniques. Obviously, we've seen Air New Zealand, for example, taking large planes to other ports to fuel those up before long-haul flights. And last night, Qantas Airways flew an empty 747 carrying only fuel to Auckland, where it did a aircraft-to-aircraft transfer of fuel across both the 747 and an A330 plane, which was successful last night. We have some images for the media who might be interested in that. We will continue to focus on supporting all those parties involved, and we look forward to an early resumption of this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And you referred to the involvement of Auckland Council and Auckland Transport in getting fuel to Auckland Airport here. So I'll ask Dean Kimpton, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Auckland Council, now to talk.
Thank you, everybody, and it's good to be able to give you a brief update. Very much the same as yesterday, but first of all I want to start off with a thank you to the way that Aucklanders, the industry, government have pulled together to address this issue for Auckland. I can assure you that Auckland Council and its CCOs, including Auckland Transport and Panuku continue to work closely with the government and industry. Our focus has been on proactively addressing constraints that may result in slowing down or inhibiting the free supply of fuel into the airport. So that's we've addressed resource and regulatory issues, resource consents and regulatory issues, transport and traffic constraints. That includes around Wynyard Wharf, which I was very pleased to hear today that has been given the green light for receiving jet fuel, and certainly the safe movement of any tankered trucks across the city, where safety remains one of our primary concerns. Pleased to hear that land transport fuels don't remain an issue, so that's been very important for us, and really also very encouraged by the fact that most passenger movements through the airport and through the airlines are at such high percentage, particularly important given that we're heading into the holiday season. So with the likelihood of an escalation reducing, I'm sure Aucklanders will be pleased with the effort that's gone into everybody, but we take nothing for granted. And so in that respect, another role that Auckland Council has is making sure we have contingency plans in place from an emergency management and a lifeline utilities perspective, which we continue to make sure are in place and that we are ready to go. So once again, a big thank you to Aucklanders and all those involved for getting us to this point, and we look forward to continued progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. So now, happy to take questions, and that includes for Stuart, who's with us in person virtually.
You've all talked about contingency plans. I think every single one of you has mentioned them. Have you all had contingency plans for this happening? Like, did you all think that this was a possibility, that this pipeline could break and Auckland could have no supply of fuel?
Someone like to respond to that? Thanks, Andrew.
So the oil industry does have contingency plans in place. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a pipeline outage, but what we do is we have a plan in place for something like this when it is a severe supply disruption. We have supply disruptions, we've had them in the past where the refinery has stopped producing for a period of time. So we have had experience in some shape or form around contingency planning. You know, a pipeline incident like this is unprecedented, and so it has been challenging, but to answer your question, yes, the industry does have contingency plans in place.
80%, sorry, I think I reported it, but the pipeline's going to be running at 80% capacity once those tests are done, sorry, yes. But what does that mean for airlines? So past next Thursday, when hopefully the pipeline will be running at 80%, what does that mean for airlines? Can you explain that, please?
Sure. So as I was saying, we've got, at the moment today, you're seeing about 95% of the airline networks operating. So what will happen as of next Thursday, if that fix comes through, gradually day by day, we'd expect to see that fuel allocation of 30% lift up, and it'll lift its way up to 80% over a period of time, number of days. So essentially what we're saying is, with the airlines being able to operate at the moment with 30% out of Auckland with that minimal disruption and cancellations, the amount of cancellations and disruptions will just drop even further from when this fix comes in. So you'll start to see it get back to 100% of or normal network activity, I'd expect, as that allocation increases.
So flights as normal, hopefully, from next Thursday onwards?
They'll increment their way there, but certainly we're very close right now today. 95% is you know, getting fairly high, and then we'd expect to see in the first few days after that they'd lift up towards that.
6 to 8 dedicated jet fuel trucks a day. If they carry 35,000 litres, it's 280,000 altogether. That's a drop in the bucket. So if the pipe isn't fixed and you just have 6 to 8 trucks a day, we're not going to get very far, is it? It'll be the airlines figuring out how to get their own fuel. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry, what the end part of the question for airlines?
It'll be if the pipe isn't fixed and it's only next Thursday. So if the pipe isn't fixed and there's only, say, 6 to 8 trucks coming out of Marsden Refinery each day, well, 280,000 litres is a drop in the bucket. It will be up to airlines to manage this if the pipe isn't fixed next week. Is that correct?
What's happening is the airlines are working closely with the oil companies on a day-by-day basis, and that's what Andrew was referring to about the 30% allocation and just checking how's that tracking, and that's based against how the fix is going. So we monitor that so that you can continue to stretch the available supplies if necessary. But from an airline perspective, they just continue to operate the contingencies they're doing today, which, as you've heard about, tankering and more fuel on board their aircraft, and just extend those operations, taking on board fuel overseas. They just continue to run those.
And I'll ask Andrew just to respond a little bit too, because that'll give you a bit more context, I think, about the quantities of fuel we're talking.
I suppose what I'm asking though is that if the pipeline isn't fixed, it's up to the airlines, because 6 to 8 tankers a day, it just won't be enough.
So the three things we're doing at the moment: one is we're working closely with the airline customers managing demand. So that's the 30% allocation, which we continue to monitor on a daily basis, which is the key driver out of everything. And then we have two supplementary programs in place. One is the trucks coming down from the refinery, and yes, it'll be 6 to 8 trucks, but then we're also working the Wynyard Wharf option, where we'll be putting in 1.5 million litres, and we'll be trucking from Wynyard Wharf to the airport, which is circa 15 k's as opposed to 170 k's, or maybe a little bit more than 15 k's, but definitely a lot closer than Whangarei. So you'll see the rate of tanker trucks going into the airport increasing, which means you'll have more fuel going into the airport. But again, those are supplementary. The key is really around managing demand, which the airline customers have done a fantastic job to date.
Just to that point, could you tell me, you talked about the 30% allocation from Whitty. Are you able to tell me what is the capacity at Whitty, the capacity for storage?
I can't tell you what the capacity is. Adrian might be able to help you, but I can tell you at the moment, in terms of total jet between Wiri and Zhuhai, there's about 15.6 million litres, and the airlines are off taking about 1 million litres a day at the moment. So if nothing else, there is 16 days of coverage. But of course we're working hard to get, the refinery's working hard to get the pipeline up and running, and we're complementing those two items with the trucking down from Whangarei, and also we're looking to start utilising Wynyard Wharf.
You talked about
Just while you're thinking of the question, we'll get to you, Should. You talked about 6 to 8 trucks. Of course, they can run 24 hours a day, so that's part of the reason for drawing on the Defence Force personnel. So the expectation is that once fully up and running, the volumes there should be somewhere between 500 and 700,000 litres. I think that's about right. So and if you put that against the current rate of drawing of the airlines, which is around the 1 million mark, it's not an insignificant contribution. And you then add the possibility of Wynyard coming into that equation as well, and it starts to look it looks pretty good.
So was that volume per day?
Yes, per 24-hour period.
In terms of that 80% capacity that was meant to be at that capacity level until the end of the year, so to make up that extra 20%, will there be extra tankers on the road until Christmas time? Is that kind of what you're looking at? Or?
In terms of the work that the working group has done in thinking about that, it's likely that what you'll see, so probably customers won't see much at all. Some of the ground fuel tankers might remain on the road longer, because you might need a little bit more supply, for example, getting to Hamilton from the Mount rather than it coming from Auckland. But customers won't see a lot. It'll take a little bit longer to build up the reserves, but the work we've done to date suggests that it's not a critical issue in that sense.
And Andrew will probably tell me off afterwards. Just text me, Andrew. But the pipeline on a normal operational day only transports about 45% jet fuel. So our customers have flexibility to decide, say in a capacity constrained environment, to actually allocate more of the remaining capacity to jet and less to ground fuels, and make up for that by bringing ground fuels in from the Mount. So the customers actually have quite a bit of flexibility. so that even in an 80% red pipeline scenario, they could actually up the ante on the jet. As I say, Andrew, just tell me off afterwards, not in public, please.
What's the bit of kit that's coming from Brazil? And what's the hold up there? Sorry, you mentioned.
Yeah, it's a bit of an unpleasant name for it, but it's called an intelligent pig. It's a device that travels through the pipeline by itself, and it tells us for every millimeter on the pipeline, sort of, what the condition of the pipe is. So it'll give us for every spot that isn't right a set of GPS coordinates and basically a dial on the clock. So it'll say at 1 o'clock on that particular GPS coordinates in that circumference of the pipe you have a rust spot, or you have a this, or you have a that. So given that we now categorically know, and we have retrieved the piece of pipe, it's now in our workshop, we absolutely categorically know it was a hit by a digger that basically weakened the metal where that hit. So to speak, we need to go through the full pipeline to see whether there have been any other people who decided to ignore our markings and sort of start digging above the pipeline and or other issues before we can go back to 100% capacity.
So if you did that pig more than once every 3 years, we wouldn't be in this situation? Is that what you're saying? Perhaps if you did it once a year, we could have avoided this?
So it depends a little bit, sort of course, when the dent occurred. I think in terms of timeline of pigging, it is important to recognize that Lloyd's, as an international certifier of pipelines, actually recertifies a pipeline every 5 years. So global practice is to actually recertify and relook at the pipeline every 5 years. And so the fact that our pig ran through it sort of 3 years ago, and that we were actually planning to run a pig through it in the next month already, is just in keeping with best practice. That's not to say that we won't sit down after all of this is over and say, given that we no longer can sort of trust the general public to actually accept that when we have very clear notices up that you shouldn't dig above both the first gas pipeline and our pipeline, we may need to address that. As I've said before, we can be accused of naivety, thinking that if we have big signs up saying do not dig here, that there are still people who get their digger out and do dig there. And we've shown your colleagues yesterday that actually where the digger hit the pipe was an exact 8 meters away from very clear signage that there was a pipeline on the ground.
Now that the pipe's in your workshop, can you release some photos of it?
Well, we want to do a bit of research, but if there was a keen appetite to see it, then I'm quite happy to sort of have a look at whether we can sort of satisfy that appetite, so to speak.
I think I'd be
That's a
pretty
very long-winded way of saying yes, we'll work on it soonish.
We've spoken to some infrastructure experts that say New Zealand is behind other countries like Australia and the UK when it comes to protecting pipes like these, because there's no legal requirement for utility companies to log their services in a central register. Do you think we need a register in place?
Look, it all starts with proper economics, doesn't it? This is not doing us any good. It isn't doing our customers any good. Would a central register really make us behave differently? We are under the same regs as Australian pipelines. It is actually Australian pipeline regs that we listen to. We have Lloyd's certification that we need to adhere to. I don't think the conclusion of this is that our maintenance schedule was inappropriate. There is actually, I've said this before, the pipeline internationally is in exceptionally good nick. Central registers, I think, you would have to have people like ourselves not wanting to do the right thing, and I don't think that is a cause here at all.
But wouldn't you know what companies were working near your pipe so you could identify risks? Wouldn't it allow you to identify potential risks?
Look, the pipeline is 170 kilometers long, and it goes through cities, farmlands, and through forests. So the idea that at all times we would know exactly who would be wanting to do what is kind of quite difficult, because that would be quite an intensive operation. I can go through how we police it, but I would also say that if people kept to the rules of the land, they actually have to come to us because we own the easement. And so if a person starts digging 15 meters either side from our pipeline, they need our consent. So we already have very good regulations in place. Now we will look at that again to see whether we need to go to government and say, look, given that this has happened, do we need more? But this was, in a sense, an illegal activity because this person should have sought consent from us before starting to dig.
Do you know, have you identified, I know, you've identified a roundabout time period, but have you identified who may have done the damage? And if so,
no, we haven't. No, we haven't. And sort of, I've said this before and I will say it again. I mean, this public appetite to know the name, I think we need to be a little bit careful with that in this day and age of trolls and all that sort of other thing. I mean, I'm not sure what we would achieve if we knew that it was Joe Blow who lived on, 12 Smith Road in Papakura. I mean, are we then all going to protest in front of his house, or what are we going to do with that information?
Minister, can we put the same question to you at the microphone about do we need a central register? Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's probably a bit unfair to ask Mr. Post to comment on whether or not there should be a central register, and primarily that's because it's not really his role. That's really a government role, and I think that's one of the things that will be looked at once we review this matter, and I think there needs to be quite an investigation into what's gone on. And everything involved in it. So I'm sure that it'll be one of the considerations whether or not we do that.
The infrastructure people that we've spoken to today says damage like this costs the country millions of dollars a year. Not having a central register, I mean, is this a failure of government?
If you have a central register, you have to be able to then know that the information in that register is correct and that it makes a difference to the safety of the pipeline or other piece of infrastructure. So I think that rather than to jump to conclusions, my focus is very much on supporting everyone here to get their fuel sorted. So really I think it's something that can wait until we have a full review about everything involved in this area.
In terms of that full review, when are you likely to start getting the ball rolling on that process? Will you have to wait till the pipeline's at 100% capacity again, or? I
don't think that's necessary. I think it's, of course we have something happening on Saturday, and we'll see, obviously I never like to predict what's going to happen and things like that, but we do need to, I think, it will be a role of government and cabinet to decide what happens with this, but my view is, as the Minister of Energy and Resources, that there needs to be a very full review and perhaps an investigation as such into quite how this has happened, and to actually find out what's gone on, and then to find out, is there something like the idea about a register, would that make a difference to whether or not we should be doing something like that in the future. But I do think it is really important that maintenance is obviously clearly important, and Mr. Poster said, well, obviously it's in the company's interest to maintain properly, but it's even more in the country's interest.
Can I just ask just about the Endeavour?
Yeah, sure.
We spoke to Commander Dewar before he
right.
We asked him where's the diesel going once they've uploaded today. They said they were still awaiting orders from the industry. Is there any idea where the diesel fuel is?
I couldn't tell you at the moment. Sorry.
Are you still determining where?
Yeah. So I mean, what we've done is tasked the Endeavour to go to the refinery. We're still working out exactly how much, if it's needed, and how much diesel it's needed to take and to where. So the point of positioning it there is so it's ready if the industry needs it. So we're at a point of not 100% sure it's going to be used, but rather than wait to get the call, we're moving it there anyway.
So it takes basically a day to get up there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This might be a question for Andrew. Just in terms of getting those tankers from the refinery down to the airport.
Yes.
I mean, there was some discussion about an issue at this end about unloading it. I mean, why has it taken so long for this to sort
So we've never actually loaded any jet onto a truck at the refinery, and so our two key considerations through the whole process has been making sure it's a safe operation and making sure we're protecting the integrity of the product. So that's at the front end, and then when we transport the jet down to the airport, there's been a lot of work done at the Juhai to make sure that we can receipt it properly again in a safe manner, and making sure that we can protect the product integrity. So, this is an unprecedented event. It's not something that's been done before. We've done this in a matter of days. We think we've done a very good job, but again, it's safety and product quality are front of mind.
So I thought you said you had contingency plans for all this happening. Wouldn't that involve loading the fuel onto tankers?
It's really around how do we manage the supply. I'd say this is a somewhat detailed part of an overall contingency plan. The fact that we have done it in less than a week, I think, is pretty good.
So you hadn't thought about how to get the fuel from the refinery to anywhere else as part of that contingency plan?
The obvious choice would be through trucking or through barging, and that's what we've done. The time has been taken around making sure that we have a good, solid, robust, safe, product quality, cognizant process in place. We've got that in place now, and now we want to move forward and ensure that we have good, solid supply going down that motorway.
But can I just double check, as part of that contingency plan, you had never thought about how to get fuel onto trucks out of the refinery?
Can I add to that, Andrew? Because the answer to that is yes. So we actually dusted off our contingency plan and said we had thought about before if we had to load trucks, how would we do that. We were fortunate enough still to employ the engineer who had thought of it in the first place, and he was actually very excited about being able to build it this week. But I would like to echo Andrew's words as well. This is jet fuel. You can lose lives by handling this badly, either by a plane falling out of the sky or by your fueling people getting killed. So I understand that 7 days feels a long time, but in order to make sure that people can handle it safely and that the integrity of the product is intact by the time it goes into the wingtip of the plane is a pretty fundamental responsibility that people in Andrew's team and people in my team carry, and that we can't take lightly.
And just on that, is jet fuel more volatile than other kinds of fuel?
No, actually the reverse is true. So jet fuel is very close to kerosene that you may still put in your storm lamp every now and then when you go camping. So it has a lesser volatility than, say, gasoline.
So these steps that you've taken both at the Auckland Airport end and at the refinery end, are these permanent fixtures now, or is this sort of a temporary thing that you're just putting in place while this is all going on?
Did you want to take that, Stuart?
Yeah, a great question. I think in our post-implementation review, we're probably going to say, sort of, is there a simple way of making this more permanent and more robust? So that'll certainly go in our review, saying, okay, now that we have it in place, how do we keep it in place, or how do we keep it quickly reusable in case we have a need for another contingency?
I just have one more airline question, sorry.
Sure.
Do airlines have commercial arrangements or contracts with New Zealand refinery for continuous supply of fuel, or not really?
The airlines are customers of the oil companies, so they just make their individual contracts with those oil companies. So no.
So there's no capacity for them. So it's not like you will supply us so much, per year or something like that. I'm just wondering here about the cost and whether there's some ability of the airlines to go back to New Zealand refinery and say, look, this has cost us this much money, you may have to pay us. Is that part of the airline thinking at the moment?
No, look, that's not something that's being focused on at all. We're just working hard just to get passengers through to their destinations at the moment. So we're not; those things will be considered in the fullness of time, I'm sure.
I suppose what I'm asking is this basically a breaking of contract by New Zealand refinery?
No, I wouldn't expect so.
Can you just talk a bit about the backlog? I mean, I guess every cancellation, every delay is putting more people on flights down the line. So, I mean, how long do you anticipate that taking to
Oh, well, that's largely clearing now, and that's what I was talking about earlier in terms of the number of cancellations has significantly dropped, the number of disruptions is really dropping, so having over 95% of flights operating today just means that backlog just disappears. Essentially, the network manages to transfer the passengers through, get the passengers to where they need to go.
So there won't need to be more flights put on to cope with that backlog?
No. Some of what the airlines are doing are putting on larger planes on some of the routes to help manage that, but no.
Hey Justin, so till today, do you know how many people are affected by the food crisis?
No, look, I couldn't give you a precise number off the top of my head. We've got, as I said, 28 member airlines, all managing their own passengers individually, so it's a bit difficult to pull that picture together.
So you don't have a specific number?
No.
Do you know how many Chinese tourists are affected?
No, I couldn't tell you, sorry.
Briefly, just in terms of the person who was responsible, I know you said you didn't want to name and shame and that kind of thing, but when you do find out who's responsible, is this, I mean, obviously this has had a massive flow-on effect. Will you be looking at taking action against either the company or the individual responsible?
That might be a question for you, I think. Should?
Look, I think it's a bit premature to have those conversations. I think we need to get through the crisis. I think there'll be regional councils involved, there'll be government involved, lawyers. It's very difficult. I'm not sure what particularly Refining New Zealand would have to gain in terms of finding out the individual. I mean, that would be a bit of a David and Goliath story in my view, and I don't know what particular benefit we would have out of that. I kind of have a sense that this will be a small contracting firm or an individual. I'm not sure that it is the best use of our time to sort of go in pursuit, but yeah.
Surely you'd want to deter others from making the same mistake, though.
Look, I say, I've said before, we've been disappointed in our naivety that we thought that if we put big signs up, people would adhere to those signs. We need to look into that, but I still believe, and we've had an enormous amount of positive feedback from farmers whose pipeline we trespass, or sort of whose land we trespass, that this is well understood. Now, again, we will need to think about that, because do we need to do biannual leaflet drops to all the owners of the land to say, look, we have big signs up, you will adhere to them or not? That's what we need to think about. But I think most New Zealanders today, when they see our signage, wouldn't get their digger out and say, I think I can forget about adhering to not digging here.
I'm also just going to say that in terms of the comments about legal issues, from the working group's perspective, we've had people there from the refinery, from the oil companies, from the airlines, and this has all been about how do we ensure there's the least minimal disruption to people. And I'd have to say that from my perspective as the convener of that group, any issues to do with legal issues have been put to one side and will be dealt with at an appropriate point in time, but that hasn't been the focus of anyone. Frankly, if they had brought that focus to the table, we would not be here having the sort of positive conversation we're having today about some of the measures that are in place.
If I may just be so bold as to come back to the earlier question around the register, although I stand, of course, by Judith, that wasn't a question directed at me. I would just give you a sense that this is not what you would call an unregulated activity. So we are under 3 different sets of regulations to make sure that we run this pipeline safely. We are being externally audited 3 times per year by 3 different inspection bodies. And then over and above that, we do sort of these intelligent pick runs. We have basically road patrols in Auckland every day to make sure that people don't do anything foolish. We helicopter over the pipeline twice a year. We fixed fly planes a number of times over the pipeline as well every year. So both from a regulatory perspective, this is probably one of the most regulated pieces of industry, if you were so call it, that we have in New Zealand, or in fact internationally, because we're internationally best in class. And on top of that, there is an enormous amount of making sure that nothing untoward happens. And I'm quite happy to put a fact sheet on all of that together if that would be useful.
Hey, so while you're here, you said that if there was an appetite for pictures, you could facilitate that. I think there probably would be an appetite, so do you think you could post or release some pictures of the damaged pipeline perhaps this afternoon?
Yeah, let me just check whether we can do that, but I'm absolutely there to help you with that.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions?
Actually, we see CCTV from China is attending today. Minister, is that a bit embarrassing? I mean, that's a massive media organisation servicing a large audience, international audience. Is that embarrassing for our reputation internationally? Just on what I think. That the story is basically.
So what you're saying is it embarrassing for us as a country that we've had an infrastructure?
Is it embarrassing?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. No. No, not at all. I think, in fact, what is really great is that when we have had a problem with this particular piece of infrastructure, that we've been able to work so quickly, so well together, to actually have the minimal disruption. I'm not sure that that would be true in every country in the world.
So you don't think the story is a fuel crisis? You don't think that will be the story told in China?
No, well, I can't control what is said in China, quite clearly. It's difficult enough to control, in fact impossible to control what's said here. So I would say that this apparently has happened before in the UK. I understand from Short, who's advised me of this, and other places. It's never happened here in 32 years. I think I'm absolutely stunned by the way, and very pleased with the way in which everyone in this room and all those working with them have got together to make sure that actually Aucklanders have not missed out on their fuel, that we've got only 5% drop in airline usage today, and even then, or flights rather today, and even then a lot of those flights, apparently people have been put onto other flights. So I think it's actually an incredible, let's say, resolve has been shown in just a few days to get this matter, where it is certainly not, crisis is not the word to call it, it's been an issue that's been dealt with very responsibly.
So not an embarrassment?
No, I would have thought not. Things happen and you have to deal with them.
If I may echo that, when the Buncefield fuel terminal in the UK burned down, Heathrow was rationed like Auckland is rationed today for years. And it took a long time to re-establish anywhere near supply normality. So for Auckland Airport to lose its single point of supply, and within a week, I hadn't heard the stat that on that 30% allocation, 90% of the flights were taking off. To have 90% of flights taking off is actually, I think, a great accolade to Kiwi ingenuity and getting things done and, saying, okay, we had a mishap, how do we get out of this? So if I were the marketing of New Zealand Inc., I would make this very easily into a success story. I say that again from a perspective of modesty, that we still feel exceptionally sorry that all of this is happening. I'm not trivializing it, but if you ever want to see can do, from a moment of me saying, whoops, you're not going to have fuel from us for the next few days, and then 6 days later, 90% of the flights taking off again, what are we going to celebrate if we can't celebrate that?
That's short, 95%.
So the correction was 95% of flights taking off.
Okay.
So thank you. No other questions? Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Short thank you to everyone else who's come along today. Thank you. Hi.